So, if you've been keeping an eye on the Pi network, you've seen a story that's become, well, painfully familiar in the crypto world, right? A huge price surge, and then an absolutely devastating collapse. But what if that crash wasn't just an accident? Today, we're going to dig into a really controversial theory floating around in the community, one that says this whole thing, the entire collapse, might have been part of some grand, deliberate plan. Let's jump in.
All right, so here's the plan. We're going to start by looking at just how bad the price crash was. Then we'll get into the juicy part, this wild theory that it was all done on purpose, maybe to build some kind of crypto central bank. After that, though, we got to pull back for a reality check and look at the more normal explanations. And we'll wrap up by trying to make sense of what's really going on with this bold but totally unverified experiment.
Okay, first up, that 90% price crash. Before we dive into any wild theories, we have to get a handle on the sheer scale of the damage here. For anyone who is actually holding Pi, man, the last while has been a truly brutal ride.
So you had this initial, euphoric pump where everyone was excited, but then the price went into a complete freefall. And we're not talking for a few days. This was a brutal, months-long nosedive that shaved off more than 90% of its value. Yeah, this was no dip. This was a catastrophic collapse that just wiped people out.
Look at these numbers. It went from a peak of around $3 all the way down to just 20 cents. On the surface, you'd look at this and think, yep, textbook pump and dump. A classic scheme that left a ton of small investors holding the bag. But according to a fascinating community analysis, there might be a much, much deeper story going on here.
All right, Section 2. This is where things get, well, really interesting. We're about to step away from simple market talk and dive headfirst into a theory that completely flips the script. What if that crash wasn't a mistake? What if it was a feature, not a bug?
So the theory asks this pretty radical question. What if the Pi Core team didn't fail to stop the price from crashing? What if they just let it happen? Like they deliberately let the market bleed out, all on purpose. The thinking is, maybe they needed that chaos to see how people would react, to gather data, and to buy themselves some time to build the real solution. And this is exactly how that community analysis puts it. It doesn't call the crash a failure. Instead, and I'm quoting directly here, it calls it a painful but deliberate transition from market anarchy to essentially planned economy. Wow. That is a seriously bold claim to make.
Okay, before we go one step further, I have to put up a huge warning sign. This is super important. What we're about to get into is an unconfirmed speculative theory. The Pi Core team has not said anything to confirm this. We are simply exploring a fascinating idea here, not reporting some kind of established fact. Got it? Cool.
So, with that major warning in mind, let's dive into this alleged strategy. How on earth does a 90% price collapse get you to a crypto central bank? Let's unpack it.
Okay, to really get what Pi is supposedly trying to do, you first have to understand what it's not trying to do. Think about the Bitcoin way. It's like the Wild West, right? Total free market, insane volatility, prices flying all over the place. Well, this theory says the Pi team looked at all that chaos and basically said, nope, not for us. Their goal isn't to create another playground for speculators. It's to build a stable, almost centrally planned economy that actually supports their ecosystem of apps. So, according to this theory, before the team could build their new economy, they needed to answer a critical question. Are our users loyal citizens, or are they just short-term mercenaries looking for a quick buck? To find out, they supposedly ran what the analysis calls a genius social experiment, staking without profit. Basically, they asked people to lock up their Pi tokens for a while for absolutely no financial reward. The big question was, who in their right mind would actually do that?
And the result? Well, according to the theory, it was absolutely staggering. The community apparently responded by locking up 600 million Pi tokens. For the team, this was supposedly the ultimate proof they were looking for. It meant they didn't just have a bunch of investors, they had an army of true believers who were willing to sacrifice short-term gains for the long-term vision.
But, and this is a huge but, we've got to hit the brakes again for another reality check. That 600 million number, it's highly disputed. Like there are no independent sources confirming it. In fact, some people are saying that number might actually be for tokens that were unlocking, the literal opposite of what the theory claims. Plus, this whole staking with no reward thing caused a ton of confusion and anger in the community, so it's a really messy data point, to say the least. Okay, so assuming they thought they had their loyal base, the theory says the next step was to build a tool for control, their very own custom automated market maker, or AMM. You can think of it like a decentralized exchange, but with a major twist. The plan is a classic carrot and stick move. The carrot is offering huge rewards to people providing liquidity for apps and services the team thinks are useful. And the stick? Punishing purely speculative fools, like trading Pi for USDC with high fees and zero rewards.
And look, it's so important to stress this again. This is all just a prediction. The AMM is still only on the testnet. We have no idea what its final functions will be. This whole description is based on what the theory thinks the team's going to do, not what they're actually doing right now.
Okay, so we've gone down the rabbit hole with this complex, almost cloak and dagger theory. But now it's time to come back up for air and do a serious reality check. Are there simpler, more boring, more conventional explanations for a 90% price crash? Oh yeah, absolutely.
Look, the truth is, what happened to Pi happens to so many crypto projects. It's a classic story. You get a launch that's fueled by insane levels of hype, but there's not much real utility to back it up. Then, a massive flood of previously locked tokens hits the market, creating huge selling pressure. Throw in the fact that it's not listed on big exchanges like Binance or Coinbase, and that people are getting frustrated with slow development, and suddenly, a 90% crash doesn't look like some grand conspiracy, it just looks like a predictable, if painful, market cycle.
So when you really weigh the evidence, this deliberate collapse theory starts to show some pretty big cracks. First off, there's zero direct proof. None. That key piece of data, the 600 million locked tokens, is totally unverified and super questionable. And, at the end of the day, Occam's razor probably applies here. The simplest explanation is usually the right one. And simple market forces are a lot more likely than a secret, incredibly complex master plan.
Okay, that brings us to our final section. What do we make of all this? We're left with two completely different stories trying to explain the exact same event. So let's put them side by side and figure out what the real takeaway is here.
So on one side of the coin, you've got the deliberate collapse theory. It's this complex secret strategy where the team is playing 4D chess as a central planner, all for long-term stability. And its status? Purely speculative. Then on the other side, you have this simple market forces explanation. It's a predictable story of hype versus reality where the team really doesn't have that much control. Its status? Well, that's the conventional wisdom.
So let's strip away all the speculation and just focus on what we actually know for a fact. Fact 1, the price collapsed. Hard. Fact 2, the Pi Network team is building their own DEX and AMM on a testnet. That part is true. But the reason for the collapse, the why behind it all, that, my friends, is still 100% speculation.
And maybe that's the real takeaway. The analysis we've been looking at ends with this thought, and I think it's a good one. Whether the interpretation is correct or not, their community-first approach is an interesting experiment in the history of digital assets. And that's really the question we're left with, isn't it? Was this a spectacular market failure, or was it a deliberate, calculated strategy? Was it just another crypto flameout, or are we watching the messy, complicated birth of a totally new kind of digital economy? For now, the jury is definitely still out.